Hey there, everybody. Scott Roark here. So we're going to go ahead and pick up with Joseph Part 2. So where we left off last time was really the introduction there in Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 4, where we found out about Joseph and a little bit about his older brothers. These were his half-brothers by his father's marriage to some other wives. And where we left off was it basically around verse 3 and 4, where we find out that Joseph um, had received this coat, and it was a rather extravagant coat, as most people tend to know. And the really powerful thing that we had left off with was it says that when his brothers saw their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So that's where we left off. And we're going to go ahead and pick up on that a little bit more today. So starting in verse 5, it says, so Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, which I don't understand why. Like, there's a part of me that thinks, like, when you saw this dream, you had to kind of realize the impact it might have on them. But it said Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. So you thought it was bad with the coat. Now we're going to go ahead and introduce this dream. And he said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. His brother said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more. Are you seeing a theme here? And they hated him all the more. And they hated him all the more because of this dream and what he had said to them. Then he had another dream. So this is verse 9. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. So he's not learning the lesson, really. Listen, he said, I had another dream, and this time the sun and the moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me. Now, this time it changes. So he's not happy with just his brothers. Now he actually goes and tells his dad. So he says, it says, when he told his father as well as his brothers, his father even rebuked him and said, what is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down on the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. You know, I talked a little bit about this in the first video, and that is a mixed household really is just a breeding ground for problems. It's a recipe for disaster. There's already a lot of jealousy. There's already a lot of trying to figure out who's most important. So often, especially in this culture, the oldest is the one who stands to gain the most and has the most honor. But they could already see that there was something different about the way the father looked at Joseph, and they really hated him for that. And so now here we have this young kid who they already hate because he's clearly dad's favorite. He's clearly getting beneficial treatment by this coat of many colors. And now he's coming up and saying, you guys aren't going to believe the dream that I had. In this dream, we were doing this stuff in the fields, and your stuff kneeled down to mine. It knelt right down. It was amazing. And then he goes on to say, and then I had this other dream. You know, every time this kid walks up, they have to be thinking, here he comes. What is it going to be now? And then he comes up and says, I had this dream now in space, now that there was the sun and the moon and the stars, and they bowed down. Now, I don't understand what that means. Like they bowed down to him. Like I can't imagine like what he saw, because I can't picture those bodies in space bowing. But for some reason, they did something where Joseph's star apparently was higher in some regard, and they all lowered themselves to him. And when he tells his dad about this, it's one of these things where I'm like, I don't like, what's he thinking? Like when he's telling him, when he's rebuking him, my question is he rebuking him like because like, how dare you? Or is it almost like, what are you doing? You need just you know, is it one of these, like they're gonna kill you, or is it a little bit of both, or is it something else that I'm just not seeing? But the point is, I think that this story also already gives you some input into Joseph's character and his personality. And I don't know if what we're seeing here is immaturity. I don't want to besmirch him by saying he was a narcissist or anything like that. But it could be that he just loved his brothers and he feels so strongly this is a God thing that's happening. This isn't just a dream. This is like a meaningful, like maybe prophetic thing. And I'm letting you guys know, maybe it's a thing of like, I don't even understand myself. Do you guys have any input? Well, they were not down for that. So really, the first section there of Genesis chapter 37, verses 1 through 11, really are kind of setting the stage. Because what you're seeing here, as I've said in video 1 and now video 2, is that you have just this really unhealthy environment that Joseph is a part of. And he's not, in and of himself, his behaviors aren't helping things. The way that he's carrying himself, the way he's sharing things, they're disliking him, and they're disliking him more and more and more. And that's really just setting the stage. And it really sets the stage for this section right here. Starting in verse 12, now his brothers had gone to graze their father's flocks near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, as you know, your brothers are grazing the flocks near Shechem. Come, I'm going to send you to them. Very well, he replied. So he said to him, go and see if it is well with your brothers and with the flocks, and bring word back to me. Then he sent him off from the valley of Hebron. This was Joseph's home. This is where at least they were temporarily living at this time. And so he's going to start taking this long walk up to Shechem. Now, when Joseph arrived at Shechem, a man found him and wandering around in the fields and asked him, what are you looking for? And he replied, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they are, where they're grazing their flocks? They've moved on from here, the man answered. I heard them say, let's go to Dothan. So Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Now I'm going to stop you right here. And it says that they went to Dothan. So let's kind of try to get an idea of where we're talking about here. Now I'm going to try this. I don't know if this is going to work. We're going to give this a shot. So give me 1 second as I'd like us to be able to look at a map and kind of see what this is, what we're talking about exactly. So 1 second. All right. Well, I'm not going to be able to share this map, but if you go onto a map, if you head out to Google and you look at Israel, you'll find that Hebron was down in the northern part by the Dead Sea, and above it then was Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And if you continue to go up, you find Shechem. Now, Shechem is exactly where Joseph first heads. Now, I don't have on this little map here, I don't have like a X equals X amount of miles. So let me just Google real quick the distance between Hebron and Shechem. 1 second. All right. So according to Google, Shechem would have been around 48 miles north of Hebron. And Dothan would have been another 10 miles north of there. So Joseph, 17-year-old boy, gets on horse or donkey or whatever and begins this trek. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm a kind of person that I really enjoy driving. When I was a kid, we would drive a lot from Ohio all the way down to Tennessee, and I loved it. And when I got into high school, I would drive that same 500 miles all the time. Like once a month, I took that drive, and I loved it. I never hated it. Some people, they can't get in a car longer than 30 minutes and they're going crazy. Not me. I love that because it gives me time to think, listen to music. But thinking is really a one I like to do. I can vividly remember my dad and I taking the trip as I became more of an adult. And it's one of my favorite memories was just that trip and asking him questions and why'd you do this? Where'd you live? How was your father and your mom? Blah, blah, blah. So here he is 17 years old and he's taken that long, long trip. And I wonder what he's thinking about. thinking about his younger brother, Benjamin, thinking about his dad, but he's also thinking about these older brothers. And to a certain degree, I think I think he loved them. I think that he probably respected them. I mean, got to think about that. When he was a kid and he was growing up, they were these older guys that were already there. They were much older than Joseph. He probably looked up to them to a certain degree, respected them for what they did. These were probably men's men. You know what I mean? They were out living this life that Joseph knew he himself were probably going to live one day. And that's what I kind of think that he thought. So as he's walking along that day, he finally arrives at Shechem, where he thinks, okay, finally, this is where I'm supposed to be. I finally found it. And they're nowhere to be found. So he doesn't know what's happened to him. Maybe he's a little afraid. Maybe he's doesn't know what's going on. But then he sees somebody and the person says, yeah, I think they said that they're going to go to Dothan. So Joseph, and this is what the Bible says, so Joseph went after his brothers and found them near Dothan. Now this is the verse. This is the verse that kills me. It's verse 18. And it says, but they saw him in the distance. But they saw him in the distance. Now, I don't know why or how they would know by seeing him in the distance that it was him. But the verse seems to imply that they could see him in the distance and there was time. It wasn't as if they saw him and he was a few, like maybe 100 yards away. They could see him some ways off. And here's why I feel like it was a pretty good distance. Because it says, but they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him. Here comes that dreamer. They said to each other, come now, let's kill him and throw him into one of these cisterns and say that a ferocious animal devoured him. Then we'll see what comes of his dreams. You can't come up with that kind of plot in 100 yards. Especially because of the fact that I would guess that as Joseph did see them from 100 yards out, he's picking up the pace. And so a couple of years ago, I started thinking, well, but how did they know? How did they know that it was him? And unless it was, his body looked a certain way, or maybe he was wearing something. And then it kind of hit me, or the idea really came to my head, is that they knew it was him because of that coat. If it had been anybody else, they may have noticed it, but there was something about that coat that when they could see it in the distance, they knew exactly who it was. And even though he was so far away and maybe picking up speed, they'd already started planning. We're going to kill him. Okay, but we can't just kill him. We have to do something. They not only think of what they're going to do, they think of what they're going to do to cover it up. And so they begin to start thinking, okay, where are we going to put the body? They're looking around. And in this area, there were all these cisterns, these wells. And so, well, we'll just throw him in one of these, and we'll just say an animal devoured him. When you lie, the best lies have to make sense. It has to be feasible. And it would seem to me that they were in an area where that was possible, where that was feasible. They weren't saying a UFO picked him up. They weren't saying that, he got hit in the head with a baseball. They were coming up with a legitimate, reasonable explanation of why he would die, because they knew it was going to have to stand up. And I got to tell you, when I came to the belief that the way they figured it was him was based upon that jacket, and to my mind, that makes the most sense. That I want you to think about those closing moments. As he's getting closer, his excitement is welling up, because he's been now, who knows how long it took him, days to get here, and he didn't find them there in Shechem. And so now he has this new hope that they're in Dothan. And as he moves there, he sees them in the distance. He's getting excited. Okay, so he's very excited, because again, I think he must love these guys and must respect them. And so as he's getting closer, he's feeling much, much better about it. Okay, good. They are safe. Dad's going to be very excited about that. And I want to be good with these guys. I want to be one of them. And as he gets closer, it changes. It changes. He's thinking, I'm going to come in there and, hey guys, and there's going to maybe there's going to be hugs and how are you? But the looks are very hard. The looks are very stern. And the hugs aren't coming. It says here, when Reuben heard this, he tried to rescue him from their hands. He says, let's not shed any blood. Throw him into the cistern here in the desert, and don't lay a hand on him. Reuben said this to rescue him from them and then take him back to his father. Okay, so Reuben was going to try to get a way around it. Let's try to appease both sides. But it wasn't going to happen. And so again, I say to you, as Joseph is coming into the circle, he's feeling one emotion, they're feeling something else. And at some point in time, it starts to sink in for Joseph. Because as he gets in, it says, so when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the richly ornamented robe that he was wearing. And they took him and they threw him into the cistern. Now the cistern was empty. There was no water in it. This is not going the way Joseph had thought it was going to go at all. Joseph had expected something. I mean, I'm sure that even back home before this, there had been the harsh word when Dad wasn't around. Maybe the punch in the gut, maybe the pushing or the bullying. They hated him. But I think Joseph might have been willing to let that go. He still loved these brothers. They were his half-brothers. And the Bible says that they sat down to eat their meal. And they looked up in the distance once again, and they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead. Their camels were loaded with spices, with balm, with myrrh, and they were on their way to take them down to Egypt. And Judah said to the brothers, what will we gain if we kill him? What do we gain if we kill him? He's out of our hair, yeah, but we don't gain anything. What do we gain if we kill our brother and cover up his blood? Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother. That's not even me making a joke. That's what the scripture says. Come, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites and not lay our hands on him. After all, he is our brother, our own flesh and blood. And his brothers agreed. You need to understand this. These brothers eating a meal, very, very likely with the ringing of their brothers' calls for help in their ears. Think about that for a second. He's screaming out, guys, why are you doing this? He was already begging them when they held him and then threw him in. But he's not giving up. He's still probably calling to them, please, I won't tell Dad. Please just let me out. Meanwhile, they're cutting all that out. Their hatred, they cannot see past it. And now greed steps in. It's like, what do we have to do? Listen, if we tell Dad that he's dead, we have nothing. We kill him, he's out of our hair, but we're not gaining anything. And so to cover that greed, what they decide to do is tell themselves that selling him into slavery is better. This is better because they don't want to acknowledge that they're really selling him to get money, but they're going to try to make it feel like, well, we're selling him for money, but at least we're not killing him. The thing is that at this time and in this culture, to be sold to a slave, to be sold as a slave was worse than death. It was worse than death. And so it's at this point in time, they make that decision. All of the brothers agree. And I can just imagine when those brothers go over to that cistern and drop a ladder or a rope in, and they're going to pull him out, what's Joseph thinking? Oh, I'm saved. Okay, guys, I swear to you, I promise you I'm not going to say a word. But this time it's still not the same. When they pull him out, they're not making eye contact again. I'm sorry, guys. I swear I won't tell Dad. But they're not making eye contact with him. And then Joseph sees it. Joseph sees the caravan. And Joseph understands what's about to happen. And now he's begging again. He's begging again. Listen, whoa, guys, no. You can't do this. 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 So when the Midianite merchants came by, his brothers pulled Joseph up out of the cistern and sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. It's at this time that I can't imagine being 17. I've traveled all that way. I've left my mom and dad. What I thought was going to happen with my brothers has most certainly not happened. There's not been a great reunion. First off, they throw me in a pit. Then when I think that everything's okay and they pull me out, now it has somehow strangely gotten worse. And they're selling me to these men whose language I may not even speak. And I'm going to tell you something else right here. It says they sold him for 20 shekels of silver to the Ishmaelites who took him to Egypt. I want you to think about this for 1 second. When Joseph starts, he heads north from Hebron to Shechem to Dothan. These Ishmaelites are traveling south. And so as they take him, as the Ishmaelites take him and they bind him, they start to travel down the path he had just come from. And I think it's very likely that as they were heading to Egypt, Joseph could see the hills of his home and perhaps had called out to his father, hoping his father could hear his voice, hoping that on that day, maybe Benjamin was out away from the house and he could hear his calls. But those men are not going to tolerate that. And his cries would probably be muffled. But what if he could still see home? What if he could see it? And it's this thing right here that I can't comprehend. And as they finally pass Hebron and they start making their way into Egypt, what is Joseph thinking? What is my future going to hold? I wonder if he's starting to think, where's God in this? Where is God in this? When Reuben returned to the cistern and saw that Joseph was not there, he tore his clothes. He went back to his brothers and said, the boy isn't there. Where can I turn now? Reuben knew what had happened. And I think Reuben felt remorse. The tearing of the clothes would indicate that, unless this was fake on his part. Then they got Joseph's robe, slaughtered a goat, and dipped the robe in the blood. They took the ornamented robe back to their father and said, "We found this. Examine it to see whether it's your son's robe." He recognized it and he said, "It is my son's robe. Some ferocious animal has devoured him. Joseph was surely Joseph has surely been torn to pieces. And then Jacob tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and daughters came to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. No, he said, in mourning, I will go down to the grave to my son. So his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. I'm wondering what those brothers thought that day as they stand before their dad and they hand him those clothes and they watch their father's heart being torn apart, what their thought is. If there was regret, there was nothing that could be done now. There was no getting him back now. It was just the same as if they had killed him. But yet they kind of had to live with the fact and the torturous idea that he was still alive and suffering somewhere far, far away. And they were going to have to live with that. And they did live with that. So while they weren't mourning, I think that there was sadness and regret. And for Jacob, he was inconsolable. Meanwhile, the Midianites sold Joseph in Egypt to Potiphar, one of Pharaoh's officials, the captain of the guard. So that's where we're going to leave off for this time. So thanks for listening. I'm hoping this is meaningful to you, and maybe you're hearing it or visioning the story in a way you never had before, and I hope you're enjoying it. So if you don't mind, if you want to subscribe for these videos or other things, I would appreciate it. Otherwise, thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.